Detective Sam Morgan sat in the driver's seat of his unmarked car, eyes scanning the empty street before him. His partner, a young and eager officer named Riley Turner, was in the passenger seat, his hands fidgeting nervously. Sam was a man who had seen the worst of what the city could offer. His once idealistic view of justice had long since faded, replaced by a cynical pragmatism born from years of witnessing corruption, crime, and the seemingly endless cycle of violence. Riley, however, was fresh, a rookie with a clean slate, eager to make a difference and full of the kind of naive energy that Sam no longer believed in. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the engine. Sam could feel the tension between them, something more than just the quiet streets. It had been building for weeks, ever since the new chief of police had taken over the precinct. Things were changing in the department, and not everyone was comfortable with the new leadership. "Strange times, huh?" Riley finally broke the silence, his voice betraying the unease he felt. Sam grunted in response, not taking his eyes off the street. He had no patience for small talk, especially tonight. Something didn't feel right. His instincts, honed over years of hunting criminals, told him that there was trouble brewing. He just couldn't place it yet. They were on a routine patrol, or so Riley thought, but Sam had other plans. His suspicions had been growing for weeks, a quiet hunch that had been nagging at him, growing louder with each passing day. Something was wrong within the department. It wasn't just the new chief. It was deeper, something rotten that no one wanted to acknowledge. Ahead, a black SUV slowly pulled into an alley, its headlights cutting through the shadows, before vanishing as the vehicle disappeared into the dark. Sam tensed, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. This was it. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Without a word, Sam pulled the car over and killed the engine. Riley looked at him, confused. "What's going on?" Riley asked, his hand hovering near his radio. "We follow," Sam said simply, his tone leaving no room for argument. Riley hesitated, unsure. "Sam, this doesn't seem like our business. We're just supposed to be on patrol." "It's our business now," Sam replied, his eyes locked on the alley. He didn't trust the SUV. Something was off, and Sam wasn't the kind of man to let his instincts go unchecked. Not after everything he'd seen. Reluctantly, Riley unbuckled his seatbelt and followed Sam as they slipped out of the car, moving silently toward the alley. The cold air bit at their faces, and the quiet of the street made every sound feel amplified. The crunch of their shoes on the pavement, the distant wail of a siren, the low murmur of voices from within the alley. As they approached, Sam motioned for Riley to stay back, his hand raised in caution. Sam crouched low, peeking around the corner. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the alley, a group of men stood huddled around the back of the SUV, their faces obscured by shadows. A briefcase was open on the ground, the contents hidden from Sam's view, but he didn't need to see them to know what was happening. This wasn't just a simple deal. The way the men carried themselves, the nervous glances they exchanged, it reeked of something bigger. And then Sam's eyes landed on the figure standing apart from the group, a tall man in a dark coat, his face barely visible under the dim light. But Sam recognized him instantly. It was Vincent Hayes, a high-ranking official in the very department that Sam served under, a man with power, respect, and a reputation for being untouchable. Sam's heart raced as he watched Hayes quietly oversee the deal. He knew that exposing something like this could tear the department apart. He also knew it could destroy his career, or worse. Hayes wasn't the kind of man who forgave betrayal easily. He had connections, far-reaching ones, and anyone who crossed him had a habit of disappearing. Riley shifted behind Sam, unaware of the gravity of what they had stumbled into. "What do you see?" Riley whispered, his voice barely audible. Sam turned to him, his face pale but determined. "We need to leave. Now." Riley frowned, confused by Sam's sudden urgency. "But not a word," Sam hissed, grabbing Riley's arm and pulling him back toward the car. "Get in. We're done here." They moved quickly, the sense of danger growing with every step. Sam's mind raced as they got back into the car. The image of Hayes burned into his thoughts. He started the engine and pulled away from the alley, his hands trembling slightly on the wheel. "What was that about?" Riley asked, his voice louder now that they were back in the car, away from the alley's danger. Sam didn't answer at first. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He knew what they had just witnessed was bigger than them, bigger than a simple patrol gone wrong. This was corruption at the highest level, and it was sitting right in the heart of the police department. Finally, Sam spoke, his voice low and filled with an edge of warning. "You didn't see anything tonight, Turner. Do you understand?" Riley's confusion turned to concern. "What?" "Sam, what's going on? We should report this." Sam shook his head. "Number, you don't report men like Hayes. Not if you want to keep your badge or your life." Riley fell silent, the weight of Sam's words sinking in. The gravity of the situation was starting to become clear to him, but there were still too many unanswered questions, too much he didn't understand. As they drove through the dark streets, Sam's thoughts were already racing ahead, trying to figure out his next move. He couldn't let this go, not after what he had seen. But if he acted too quickly, too recklessly, he would end up just another casualty in a system that devoured those who stood against it. No, Sam thought. This would require patience. He would need to gather more evidence, more allies. But one thing was certain. The storm was coming. And when it hit, nothing in the department would ever be the same again. The next morning, Sam Morgan stood in front of the precinct, staring at the building as though seeing it for the first time. The usual bustle of officers coming and going had a different air about it. The same people, the same routine. But now everything felt tainted. Behind the polished badges and stiff uniforms, there were secrets, secrets that ran deep. Sam had barely slept the night before. The image of Vincent Hayes standing in that alley, overseeing a deal in the dead of night, played over and over in his mind. It gnawed at him, but he knew better than to act impulsively. Hayes was untouchable, and the wrong move could cost him everything. Riley, his young partner, had arrived early, waiting nervously by the entrance. He had a look of someone who had come to a grave realization, but was still hoping it might all be a mistake. His naive hope was palpable, but Sam knew better. The rot had already spread too far. "We need to talk," Riley said, his voice barely more than a whisper as Sam approached. Sam didn't respond at first. He pushed open the heavy doors of the precinct and walked inside, Riley trailing behind him. Inside, officers bustled about their business, but to Sam it all seemed surreal, like a movie playing out in front of him, with none of them aware of the darkness lurking just below the surface. The two of them walked in silence to a quieter part of the building, a break room that was mostly empty this early in the day. Sam leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and finally turned to Riley. "I'm going to say this once," Sam began, his voice low and steady. "What we saw last night stays between us. Understood?" Riley's face was a mixture of confusion and fear. "Sam, we can't just ignore this. We saw Vincent Hayes." "I know what we saw," Sam interrupted, his eyes darkening. "And I'm telling you, if you so much as breathe a word of this to anyone, you'll be out of this precinct faster than you can blink, or worse." Riley took a step back, clearly shaken by Sam's intensity. He'd idolized Sam for being a seasoned detective, but now, seeing the look in his mentor's eyes, he wasn't sure what to think. "So, what do we do? Just pretend it didn't happen?" Sam exhaled slowly, his thoughts racing. "Number, we don't pretend, but we don't go to war without knowing who our enemies are. There's more going on here than we realize, and if we make the wrong move, we're done." "What do you mean?" Riley asked, his voice cautious. Sam glanced around the room, ensuring they weren't being overheard, then leaned in closer. "Hayes isn't just another dirty cop. He's connected. He's protected. Whatever we saw last night, it's part of something bigger. Drug deals like that don't just happen without people in power looking the other way. If we're going to take him down, we need proof, and not just what we saw. We need to know who else is involved." Riley's eyes widened. "You think there are more?" Sam nodded grimly. "I'm sure of it. Corruption like this doesn't happen in isolation. Hayes has people backing him, covering his tracks. If we go after him without the full picture, we'll be buried. We need to play this smart." Riley's hands clenched into fists. "I don't get it. How did someone like Hayes rise to the top? I mean, if he's dirty, why hasn't anyone stopped him?" Sam let out a bitter laugh. "Because people like Hayes don't just work alone. They surround themselves with allies, people who benefit from keeping things the way they are. And if you try to cross them, you end up like the last detective who tried to clean up this place." Riley frowned. "What do you mean?" Sam hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice lowering even further. "Detective Owen Parker. He was the best in this precinct. Smart, tough, and not afraid to go after the big players. He started digging into some things a few years ago, stuff that didn't add up. 2 weeks later, he was found dead. Officially, it was an accident. But I knew Parker. He wasn't careless. He got too close, and they silenced him." Riley stared at Sam in disbelief. "Are you saying they killed him?" Sam met Riley's gaze, his expression hardened by years of experience. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Riley leaned back, his head spinning. He had joined the force to make a difference, to help people. But now he was starting to see the ugly truth that Sam had known all along. There was a war happening behind the scenes, and they were standing on the front lines without even knowing it. "So, what's the plan?" Riley asked, his voice steadying as he accepted the gravity of the situation. Sam looked at him, impressed by the rookie's determination. "We do our jobs, but we keep our eyes open. I'm going to dig into Hayes quietly. Bank records, connections, anything that might expose him. We build a case bit by bit, and we don't trust anyone, not even the people who seem clean." Riley nodded, though the weight of what Sam was suggesting hung heavy between them. "I'm with you, Sam, whatever it takes." Sam nodded in acknowledgement, though he knew how dangerous this path would be. They were diving headfirst into a storm, and once they started, there would be no turning back. That evening, Sam sat in his small apartment, papers and files spread out across his table. He had begun piecing together a web of connections, names, addresses, financial records, anything that might give him a clue as to how deep Hayes's corruption went. It was slow work, tedious, but Sam was meticulous. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Morgan. You don't want to end up like Parker." Sam's heart skipped a beat. His hand tightened around the phone. Someone was watching him. They knew. For a moment, fear washed over him, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. Whoever sent the message had made one thing clear. He was getting too close. And that meant he was on the right track. Sam deleted the message, his jaw set in determination. He wasn't backing down. Not now. A few days passed since the ominous text message had shaken Sam's resolve. He had expected pushback, but now he knew for sure that whoever was behind the corruption wasn't just aware of him. They were watching his every move. The message had rattled Riley too. The rookie had barely slept, jumping at every shadow. But Sam couldn't afford distractions. He had to stay focused. The precinct, which had once felt like a place of purpose, now seemed tainted. Everywhere Sam looked, he wondered who else was involved. Was it just Hayes, or were there more? The answers lay somewhere beneath the surface, and Sam was determined to find them. He sat at his desk, reviewing the files he had quietly pulled from the precinct's archives. He'd been looking into Hayes's connections, his financial history, anything that could hint at the breadth of his corruption. Sam wasn't naive. He knew this was bigger than just drugs. People like Hayes always had multiple layers of protection: money, power, and allies in high places. "Find anything yet?" Riley asked, his voice low as he leaned over Sam's desk. Sam glanced up at him, shaking his head. "Not much, but I've got a lead. There's a property on the edge of town, under a shell corporation. The name on the papers isn't Hayes, but I'd bet my badge it's connected to him. It's too quiet, too hidden." Riley frowned. "You think that's where the deals are happening?" "Maybe. Or it's where they're keeping something important. Either way, we need to check it out." Sam stood up, gathering his things. "We'll go tonight, after the shift." Riley hesitated. "You sure it's safe? I mean, if they're watching us?" Sam stopped, looking Riley dead in the eye. "It's not safe. Nothing about this is safe, but we don't have a choice. If we're going to take Hayes down, we need evidence that no one can deny, and we're running out of time." Later that night, Sam and Riley found themselves driving through the outskirts of the city. The streets were quieter here, the buildings more spaced out, a perfect spot for shady deals and hidden secrets. Sam's hands gripped the steering wheel as the road stretched out before them, dark and deserted. "Pull up here," Sam said, his voice barely a whisper as they neared the property he had been investigating. It was an old warehouse, surrounded by a tall chain-link fence. It looked abandoned, but Sam knew better. The quietest places often held the loudest secrets. They parked a short distance away, stepping out of the car silently. Riley followed Sam's lead as they approached the warehouse on foot, the cold air biting at their faces. Sam's heart was racing, not from fear, but from anticipation. He knew this was a crucial moment. They were getting closer, and the danger was becoming more real. As they reached the fence, Sam motioned for Riley to stay low. "We go in quiet, no lights, no noise. If we're caught—" Riley nodded, understanding without Sam needing to finish the sentence. They slipped through a gap in the fence, moving carefully toward the building. The warehouse loomed in front of them, its windows dark, no sign of movement. Sam kept his hand on the grip of his gun, his senses on high alert. They reached a side door, slightly ajar, as if inviting them in. Sam exchanged a glance with Riley, then slowly pushed the door open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and oil. The warehouse was vast, filled with old crates and machinery. It seemed empty, abandoned, but Sam knew better. His instincts told him they weren't alone. They moved deeper into the building, their footsteps barely audible on the concrete floor. Sam's eyes scanned the shadows, looking for any sign of activity. Then he saw it. At the far end of the warehouse, a small office, its door slightly open with light seeping through the cracks. "Over there," Sam whispered, motioning toward the office. They crept closer, each step bringing them closer to the truth. As they neared the door, Sam could hear voices, muffled but tense. Someone was inside. Sam pressed his back against the wall beside the door, listening carefully. "We need to move the money out of here tonight," a voice said, low and urgent. "The police are getting too close. Hayes said to clean everything up." Sam's pulse quickened. This was it. They had stumbled onto something big. He motioned to Riley, signaling that they were going in. With a swift motion, Sam pushed the door open, his gun drawn. "Hands up!" he shouted, stepping into the office. Inside, two men stood frozen in place, their eyes wide with shock. One of them reached for something on the desk, but Riley was quicker. "Don't even think about it," he warned, his voice shaky but firm. The room was small, cluttered with paperwork and duffel bags filled with cash. But it was the board on the wall that caught Sam's attention. It was covered in photographs, names and lines, connecting them like a spider's web. At the center of it all was Vincent Hayes. "We're taking everything," Sam said, his voice cold. "You're both under arrest." The men didn't resist, too stunned by the sudden intrusion to fight back. Riley moved to secure them, while Sam began scanning the paperwork. It was all there. Evidence of money laundering, drug deals, and connections to key players in the city. This was the proof they needed, the smoking gun that could take Hayes down. But as Sam rifled through the files, his phone buzzed. He hesitated, then pulled it out. Another message from the unknown number. "You should have stayed out of this. It's too late now." Sam's blood ran cold. He looked up at Riley, who was securing the two men. "We need to move, now," Sam said, urgency in his voice. "What's wrong?" Riley asked, confused. "They know we're here." As they rushed out of the warehouse, hauling the evidence and their prisoners with them, Sam's mind raced. Whoever was watching them wasn't just a step ahead. They were prepared. Sam's phone buzzed again, but he didn't need to check it to know what it said. As they reached the car, Sam's worst fears were confirmed. In the distance, headlights appeared, 3 black SUVs speeding toward them. "We've got company!" Sam shouted, shoving the prisoners into the back seat. "Get in!" Riley jumped into the passenger seat as Sam floored the gas, the car screeching as they sped away from the warehouse. The SUVs were gaining on them, their headlights cutting through the dark like predators closing in on their prey. "We're not going to outrun them!" Riley shouted, panic rising in his voice. "We don't need to outrun them," Sam growled, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "We just need to survive long enough to get this evidence to someone we can trust." The chase was on, and Sam knew they were running out of time. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. But now, there was no turning back. They had what they needed to expose Hayes, but getting it to the right hands would be a fight for their lives. The storm was closing in fast, and Sam could feel the weight of the darkness bearing down on them. The tires screeched against the asphalt as Sam weaved through the narrow streets, his heart pounding in his chest. The black SUVs were closing in, their engines roaring like a pack of wolves hunting their prey. Beside him, Riley was breathing heavily, his hand clenching his seatbelt as if it might somehow keep them from spiraling into disaster. "We're not going to make it to the precinct," Riley shouted over the noise. Sam didn't respond immediately. His mind raced, calculating their chances, every possible route, every potential move. He knew Riley was right. They were too far out, and whoever was behind those SUVs wasn't just going to let them walk away with the evidence. "There's a safe house 10 minutes away," Sam finally said, his voice steady but strained. "It's off the grid. We can lay low and figure out our next move." Riley nodded, trusting Sam's judgment. He knew that they were in way over their heads, but backing down wasn't an option anymore. They had come too far. Sam turned sharply onto a side street, the wheels barely gripping the road as they sped through the darkened neighborhood. The SUVs followed close behind, relentless in their pursuit. Sam could see the glint of weapons through the windows of the lead vehicle. This wasn't just a scare tactic. They were coming to kill. "Hold on," Sam shouted as he jerked the wheel, sending their car down a narrow alleyway. The sides of the vehicle scraped against the brick walls as they tore through the tight space, the screech of metal on stone ringing in their ears. The first SUV tried to follow, but it was too wide. It slammed into the entrance of the alleyway, stuck fast, while the other two screeched to a halt behind it. Sam saw his chance. He floored the gas, shooting out of the alley and onto a side street. "They're stuck," Riley said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Not for long," Sam muttered, his eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. "They'll be coming around." The safe house was an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. One of Sam's few remaining contacts had given him the location years ago. It wasn't much, but it was hidden, untraceable. They just needed to get there before the SUVs found another way to close in. Finally, the warehouse loomed ahead, its silhouette barely visible in the night. Sam pulled the car to a screeching halt and grabbed the duffel bag filled with evidence. "Move!" Sam barked, and they both sprinted toward the entrance. The old door creaked open, and they rushed inside, slamming it shut behind them. The interior was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the moon through the broken windows. Sam took a moment to catch his breath, the adrenaline still surging through his veins. Riley looked around, his eyes wide. What now? We can't stay here forever. Sam pulled out his phone, his mind already working on the next steps. We won't have to. I know someone. Detective Mara Pierce, Internal Affairs. She's clean, and she's been after Hayes for years. She's our best shot. But can we trust her? Riley asked, his voice tinged with doubt. Sam didn't answer right away. He knew the risks of trusting anyone, but they didn't have a choice. We don't have time to second guess. We call her, we hand over the evidence, and we bring Hayes down. Sam dialed Mara's number. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice sharp and alert even in the middle of the night. Mara, it's Sam. I've got something big, something that will take down Hayes for good, Sam said, his voice quick and urgent. There was a pause on the other end. Sam, do you have any idea what you're getting into? Hayes has half the city in his pocket. I know, Sam replied, but I've got enough to put him away. I'm sending you everything. Another pause, then Mara's voice softened, tinged with determination. All right, send it over, and I'll meet you at the old precinct lot in 30 minutes. We'll handle the rest from there. Sam hung up, sending the files over to Mara's secure line. He knew it was risky, but Mara was their last shot. They couldn't take this to anyone else. Anyone inside the precinct might already be compromised. Just as Sam finished sending the evidence, the roar of engines cut through the quiet night. The SUVs had found them. They're here, Riley whispered, his voice filled with dread. Sam's eyes hardened. We hold them off until Mara gets here. They quickly moved to block the doors, but the sound of footsteps outside the warehouse grew louder. Sam peered through the broken window, his heart sinking as he saw the armed men closing in. Get down! Sam shouted as the first gunshots rang out, shattering the window and sending shards of glass flying through the air. They ducked behind an old metal beam, the sound of bullets ricocheting off the walls filling the space. Sam's mind raced. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had to hold on, just long enough for Mara to arrive. Riley, cover me! Sam shouted over the gunfire. Riley nodded, pulling out his service weapon and firing blindly toward the door, hoping to buy them some time. Sam took the opportunity to move closer to the side of the warehouse, where an old set of stairs led up to a narrow platform overlooking the entrance. From there, he could see the men moving in, their guns drawn as they slowly advanced. Sam took a deep breath, steadying his aim. He fired, taking down one of the attackers. The others scattered, returning fire. We're pinned down, Riley shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Sam gritted his teeth, firing again. Just a little longer. The minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The gunfight raged on, and Sam could feel his hope fading as the attackers closed in. But then, in the distance, he heard it, the faint sound of sirens. Mara's here, Sam shouted, relief flooding through him. The armed men hesitated, their confidence wavering as the sound of approaching police vehicles grew louder. Then suddenly, the doors of the warehouse burst open, and Mara Pierce stormed in with a team of internal affairs officers, their guns trained on the attackers. Drop your weapons! Mara commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. The attackers hesitated for a moment, then, seeing the overwhelming force against them, they reluctantly dropped their guns. Sam lowered his weapon, breathing heavily as the tension finally broke. Mara walked over to Sam, her expression grim. You weren't kidding about the trouble, were you? Sam managed a weary smile. You have no idea. An hour later, the warehouse was swarming with officers. Hayes's men had been arrested, and the evidence Sam and Riley had uncovered was being carefully collected and catalogued. Mara was reviewing the files, her face unreadable as she took in the scope of the corruption. "This is bigger than I thought," she muttered, shaking her head. "Hayes is finished. We've got him." Sam stood beside her, his arms crossed. "It's about time." Mara looked at him, her expression softening. "You did good, Sam. Both of you." She glanced at Riley, who was standing nearby, still processing everything that had happened. Riley smiled weakly. "I guess we're not done yet, huh?" Sam shook his head. But we've taken the first step. Hayes will be arrested, and the rest of his operation will crumble. It's going to take time, but the truth is out there now." As they stood there, the weight of everything finally began to lift. The darkness that had hung over the precinct, over the city, was starting to fade. Hayes would be brought to justice, and with him, the corruption that had poisoned the department for years. 2 days later, Vincent Hayes was arrested at his office. The charges against him were staggering: drug trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy, and abuse of power. As he was led away in handcuffs, the entire city watched. It was the fall of one of the most powerful men in the city, and it sent shockwaves through every corner of the precinct. Sam and Riley stood outside the courthouse, watching the news unfold on a nearby screen. "You think it's over?" Riley asked. Sam sighed, the weight of the last few weeks catching up to him. "It's never over, kid. But it's a start." They stood there in silence, knowing that while the battle was won, the war against corruption was far from finished. But for the first time in a long time, there was hope. Hope that the system could change, that justice would prevail, and that the darkness could be pushed back. As they walked away from the courthouse, the sun began to rise, casting a golden light over the city. It was a new day, a day that had been hard-earned, and they were ready for whatever came next. Subscribe to support our work.